I'm going to let Mike start off with a little update on a couple of items of note, and then I'll talk a little bit. I'll take Danette's point, and I'll talk a little bit about the Congressional Liaison program. So Mike, take it away.
Okay. As I hope you know, this is kind of a joint meeting of two organizations that are mother-daughter organizations. PDA is Progressive Democrats of America, a national organization, and PDA-CA is a state organization, and they're very closely related and share even some people in the officers and things like that. But up until PDA-CA came around, PDA meetings were not supposed to have federal issues, which would have included even Congress people and endorsing them. Not that we do very many endorsements, but we do some. And lately, what PDA-CA has become involved in is a month or two ago, like seems longer, we were highly involved in the no on the recall move. And we had phone trees going, and we had meetings, we had statewide meetings on it. And so we can take the credit for Newsom not being recalled, although he will never know that. The next statewide meeting will be November 14th. And the topic we are taking on is Medicare for all, or enhanced Medicare for all. And you might think, well, that's not PDA-CA, that would be the feds. But we know that the possibility of getting Medicare for all at the congressional level is pretty close to nothing. And so we're going to be working on it at the state level. We don't want it to have the same fate that the healthcare issue had in the last term, where it just died, which is, we're afraid that that may happen. That was SB 562. We're afraid that that may happen with AB 1400, but we're going to do what we can with your help and assistance to keep that from happening. We're going to really press to have that going on. And we're going to have an informational meeting and maybe an organizational statewide meeting on November 15th. So that's what PDA-CA is up to. Thanks.
All right. So the other thing is we have a Congressional Liaison program. Mike's the leader of our outreach to District 53, Sarah Jacobs. And we have people reaching out to the various congressional representatives here, except for Scott Peters. So if you happen to live in Scott Peters' district, by all means, right here is a very easy web address, San Diego at PDA-CA.com, and just forward me your information. Say, I live in Scott Peters district. We'll connect you up with Danette Abbott Wicker, and she's our Western States field rep for PDA. And she'll get you trained and dialed in on how to reach out and build a dialogue with that office, so that we can start at a national level. When you talk to them, it gets followed up by our national office, and they call their Washington, D.C. office and said, we understand you had a chat with, your office had a chat with so-and-so and so-and-so about X, Y, and Z. And we're following up to see what your thoughts are on this. And we want to strongly encourage you to follow up on your constituents' concerns. So that's that. We talked about the single payer healthcare. It's AB 1400 is the bill number. Assembly Bill 1400, single payer California healthcare. And I also have a note here that we may potentially be doing endorsements during our January meeting. And again, submit your recommendations to San Diego at PDA-CA.com so that we know what races that we want to endorse. Because if we're going to endorse somebody, we also want them to know when we endorse them that we're going to add some manpower and maybe a little bit of money to their campaigns to let them know that we care. And so there's that. Here's a list of all the federal offices. And right here is the a good address that you can get candidate information for all the various campaigns. And then we're asking for volunteers to do letter drops, interface registration with the registrar of voters. And we also have, we're looking for some new officers for PDA-CA. We've had a couple resignations. So we're looking for people to volunteer. We need a new secretary and a new at-large person. So if you think of somebody within the state that is progressive, if you want to, maybe put your name in for consideration, again, it's the San Diego at PDA-CA.com address. And dang, we're doing really good. You want to get started right away, Mr. Myers?
We can get started whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, we're going to let you do it. And Mike, if you can give him the ability to share screen. So make him a co-host. All right. We there? He's still looking. There we go. Dave Myers.
You guys all see that?
Yes, we do.
Yay. So thanks everybody for having me here tonight to talk about the sheriff's budget and liabilities associated with the sheriff's budget, and then figure out who's really paying for what, where it comes from. And just a little background for those that don't remember or know who I am. So I am Dave Myers, and I did 35 years in law enforcement here in San Diego County, and in 2018 ran for sheriff, and when unsuccessful, I retired as a sheriff's commander. So I have some many years of experience working within the sheriff's budget, understanding the sheriff's budget, and understanding, I think most importantly, is the liabilities associated with that budget, where it goes, and who pays what. This comes from the County of San Diego's website, their budget adoption page. And as you can see, staffing wise within the public safety group and budget wise, the largest amount is allocated to the sheriff, the highest number of people and the largest amount of money. You can see the sheriff's budget is almost $1.1 billion. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to be responsible for, and there's a lot of different funding sources. Now, the top section is within that budget, salaries and benefits. Now, within a budget, there are a lot of discretionary funds, and then there's a lot of funds that are not discretionary. And the salaries and benefits can change every year depending on the increases that the employee groups have negotiated. Now, these numbers at the top, those are the salaries and benefits that are budgeted, and at the bottom, that's the total budget. So there is still a lot, there is still hundreds of millions of dollars of discretionary funds. And what's not captured here is what I call overtime. And we're going to be talking a little bit about overtime and how the sheriff budgets for overtime, and then where the liability costs come from. Now, in a budget cycle, some of the unknowns that I've experienced over the years, and a lot of these things that we're going to talk about are what I call, you cannot control them, But a lot of them that I'm going to talk about, you can control. And one of the biggest unknowns in overtime, I remember during one of the biggest fire seasons we had in 2008, the sheriff's budgeted about $20 million in overtime for the year, but we spent $75 million. Now that has to come from somewhere. Now, a huge portion of that came from personnel costs, equipment costs associated with fighting that fire. Now, what's also not captured is, at that time, it was declared a federal disaster area, and the county did eventually apply to FEMA, and that money was reimbursed, but it takes a couple years. But somebody still has to pay. You have, in 2020, we saw an increase in requests for law enforcement to respond to demonstrations. During 2020, we saw a lot of protests occur throughout the county. Now, unlike other police departments, your sheriff's department is the chief law enforcement officer in the county. Therefore, within the request for assistance hierarchy, your smaller police agencies can request what's called mutual aid. And by agreement, the sheriff has to respond and has to respond with personnel. So that's mandatory. Now, everybody who responds, whether it's highway patrol, the sheriff, or anybody else, they are personally responsible for their own costs. The agency who calls for mutual aid is not sent a bill by those police agencies who responded. I'll give you an example that I personally experienced and witnessed was the riots in La Mesa in May of 2020. Where the sheriff's office was requested, mutual aid was sent, hundreds of deputies, helicopters were sent, and that was all done at the cost of the sheriff's department. That's stuff that's not budgeted, so that has to come from somewhere. Now also, tuck this away in the back of your mind, unexpected costs as associated with, let's say there are claims of excessive force and lawsuits are filed. So they go after the agencies who are alleged to have committed the excessive use of force. And if they are sustained, those agencies who responded have to pay it, not the ones who requested it. So again, those are liabilities associated that are not budgeted. You know, and let's go right down, worker comp costs. And, you know, why does this matter? Okay, we all should be covered as workers and everything. But right now we're seeing an environment in which COVID is running rampant. We see an environment where in San Diego County, 80% of the population is fully vaccinated, 90% or more, at least one vaccination. But it's been reported in the sheriff's office that the vaccination rate is as low as 23%. Now, associated with that number is the presumption in the state of California that if a law enforcement person is exposed to COVID, that occurred on the job. So those costs are borne by the employer, by the sheriff's department. And so let's move on down to sick leave. They kind of go hand in hand. So somebody's exposed to COVID, not vaccinated. Their recovery time is a lot longer than if you get the flu or something like that. And so in law enforcement, the use of sick leave, it's not like you can let that position go vacant. You have to fill those positions. So they're filled with overtime. So those, again, are unrealized liabilities for extended periods of time that are hard to budget for, unless, let's say, for instance, an agency had vaccine mandates and everybody was properly vaccinated to prevent those type of liabilities with an agency. You could cut down on your sick leave usage, you can cut down on your work comp costs. Vacation time, I mean, people do need their time off, and those departments create policies that you cannot take more than 4 weeks off. You have to fill those positions with overtime. That's easy to budget for because you know what it's going to be. You know what the maximum liability can be for the person. Again, I'm going to go back to unexpected costs, and it's inmate medical costs, again, within the jail system, especially when you have extremely low morale, you don't have enough medical staff, and you're not increasing disease prevention within the county jail system. And I'll go back to a 2013 grand jury report, which told the sheriff, hey, look, you have a ripe atmosphere for hepatitis A to spread in the jail system. The grand jury highly recommends that you vaccinate every inmate against hepatitis A. The sheriff's response back to that was, no, we're not going to do that, and did not do that. We did see in 2013, 2014, a hepatitis A outbreak in San Diego County, and 23 people died. That has unrealized consequences within the jail system of costs associated with also staff being exposed. You know, I think everybody who drives a car right now are seeing increased costs in fuel. Those are unrealized liabilities. For those that don't know, several years ago, Prop 172 was a tax revenue measure to benefit law enforcement. And in this county, the top 3 recipients of Prop 172 money, the highest recipient is the sheriff's office, probation, and the district attorney's office. And that's, you know, that's very unstable revenue, but the sheriff budgets for it and has a lot of discretion in how to spend it, because it's not supposed to supplant the sheriff's budget, but it's supposed to supplement. The sheriff has a fund that's totally discretionary to the sheriff, and it's the asset seizure fund. And last I looked, it's at about $3 million. The sheriff can spend it on all kinds of things, and doesn't talk much about it. All the liability costs that we're talking about here, including payouts, affect the sheriff's budget, affect programs for discretionary funds and what they could be spent on. Now, liabilities that could affect the sheriff's budget. Right now, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department is known to have the highest rate of inmate mortality of the largest jails in the state of California. And what that translates to is costs associated with lawsuits family members file against the sheriff's office. Since 2009, the Sheriff's Department has had 165 persons die in custody. A majority of them were never convicted of a crime. 82% are men from the BIPOC community. And so when we talk about jail deaths, recently, court settlements and the liabilities that the county and the Sheriff's Department have to pay out, there was a record settlement of $12 million. Settlements of 73 claims of excessive force and $14 million. Just in jail death cases, the liability that the Sheriff's Department has faced in recent years is now over $20 million, with a record number of cases still pending to be resolved. Now, besides the jail death cases, I emphasize some sexual abuse cases. Deputy Fisher, who's emphasized here, while on duty, sexually assaulted over 20 women. And so, you know, for me, in a law enforcement agency, we have to ask ourselves, who's watching the hen house? Who is watching the fort? To who are we hiring? How are we hiring? What are the processes we're doing to hire people? Why are so many people dying in custody? What are the processes that we are not implementing, which are allowing individuals to die in custody? Well, in the county of San Diego, we have what's called the County Law Enforcement Review Board. It was actually voted in by the citizens over 30 years ago, but they're working under 30-year-old rules. You know, I'm really happy to say that at least in the last year, the current chair of the County Law Enforcement Review Board has taken a very proactive posture on changing what CLRB can oversee and what they can investigate. And it's very beneficial because, as you can see here, several years ago, because there were so many jail death cases and the County Law Enforcement Review Board was so overwhelmed that they just dismissed 22 jail death cases without even investigating, without even looking to see if there were policy issues that could have been changed. And so that was very frustrating to a lot of families, family members, sisters, brothers, whose jail death cases were never looked at by a civilian oversight board who has responsibility to do that. I'm glad to say that recently I testified at the County Law Enforcement Review Board in support of the changes. One of the major changes in jail death cases is CLRB had no oversight of medical staff and medical procedures. And in conducting any jail death investigation, and I was a homicide investigator for a while, those are the first things you look at are medical records and the medical care that was provided, and that wasn't looked at, and that's going to be changed hopefully. You know, one of the other things we talked about, liabilities from police agencies. Here we see the sheriff's office who responded to La Mesa Police Department mutual aid request, and as a result, they used force. They used projectiles, rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, and pepper spray, and there have been several lawsuits filed against the sheriff's office. And you know, I'm not here to judge what they did, but what I will point out is La Mesa Police, to their credit, after this event, hired an outside consulting firm to come in and do an independent review of their police practices. And that was the first time in my over 3 decades of law enforcement I've ever seen a law enforcement agency open themselves up to that type of review. But as part of that review, and since it was the sheriff's office who responded, the sheriff's office refused to participate in any review conducted by the city of La Mesa. Finally, the sheriff's office acquiesced, but they requested they would only respond to written questions. There would not be any follow-up questioning of any personnel. And it did not sit well with La Mesa city elected officials that chastised the sheriff's response for not participating in what happened. You know, we are seeing unprecedented awareness of law enforcement and law enforcement's need for accountability and transparency, which I think is extremely critical in creating the trust needed. And a lot of those things must change within agencies because we are seeing huge amounts of liability associated with their actions, and there's no accountability for those actions which a court has deemed to be wrong and causing deaths or harm to the community, and we're not seeing any of the follow-up being conducted. You could stop making me the co-host because I'm letting all kinds of people in. And I'd love to take some questions. But of course, letting Kenya Taylor in and Colleen.
You know, I'll kick it off because I read an article where CLRB was going to was requesting to change the rules so that they could actually go and investigate immediately rather than having to wait for all the evidence to be collected and the crime seemed to be cleaned up and processed by the sheriff's department so that there's absolutely nothing for them to do except look at an empty room. So is that something that you were mentioning that you were in support of?
Yeah. So I was actually at that meeting and I spoke in support of, and the request was from those who have experience as their investigators in death investigations to show up at the scene to see real time what the scene looks like, to be able to view evidence real time, not to interfere with the investigation, not to interfere with what's happening. But as, like I said, as a homicide investigator, I told them that it was not unusual, even for the district attorney's office, who is supposed to be an independent reviewer also of, let's say, officer-involved shooting scenes. They send investigators to show up to observe. It would make sense for a transparent and trustworthy community oversight investigative board to have their investigator present there at the scene. Made sense.
Thank you. Okay, if I can see hands, I'll take raised hands. All right. Seeing no more hands, I will ask one more question. And this actually goes back to your last, what you said a couple of years ago, that there is a discretionary fund that's basically comes out of all the commissary sales of all the clients in the jail. And the sheriff has control of it. And has did Sheriff Gore ever spend any of that money for the benefit of the prisoners in the jail that you're aware of?
No. Matter of fact, there was an article written that he spends a lot of the money for those individuals. Inmate Welfare Fund is supposed to go for programming for the inmates. Now, he's spent a majority of it on training for the deputies and salaries for the deputies. And so that's, that's another, in my opinion, that type of money, that type of fund should be overseen and very transparent by a community-based group.
Okay.
A question.
Sandra, go ahead. What's your question?
I think I must have misunderstood you. Did you say that only 23% of law enforcement had been vaccinated?
You did not misunderstand me one bit. So it's been reported in Voice of San Diego, and they looked at policing agencies, large police agencies in California, and it was reported that the San Diego Sheriff's Department's vaccination rate of their employees is 23%.
Wow.
Wow. That's an understatement, yes.
Conversely, I work in healthcare. I'm an X-ray tech, and I work for a small clinic, but 100% of everybody in my clinic has been inoculated, and they just put out a letter saying that once you've had your 2 inoculations, you need to, after 6 months, get your booster. And if you don't get your booster, you have to provide a weekly negative COVID test result. So just to kind of let you know the difference in, who trusts science and who doesn't.
Wow.
Okay, so we actually have hands raised, so I'm going to do this in order that they came up. So we'll we actually are running out of time, so I'm only going to take one more question. And the first hand raised was Ilka, so I'll let Ilka ask her question. And if we have time at the end of the meeting, we can come back and ask more questions.
Hey, Dave, thank you so much for being here. I am just so excited about all the hard work you're doing. And I'm just so honored to be call you friend. My question is, I actually have a couple questions, but I'll just ask 2. And one of them is there an oversight committee within the jails and the prisons to stop police or the brutality from the sheriff's department upon the inmates? Because in mentoring women, I have come across talking to some of them where they talked about how it was almost like there were no rules how the deputies could treat them. Even to the point where one woman said she had been really sick and was lined up to go into court. And so she went to the trash can to spit out what had gathered in her throat. And the male deputy lashed out at her and said, swallow it. And, and physically touched her. And when she told me that story, I said, well, you should file a complaint. And her actual response was, you don't have any rights when you're there.
Yeah,
And
it's for the county of San Diego, I mentioned a little bit ago, the Community Oversight Board that anybody can complain to is the County Law Enforcement Review Board. But some of the rules they work under are so antiquated that, in my opinion, they don't have the complete picture to do a complete investigation, and it not very effective. But they also, agencies have internal affairs processes, but you have to physically file a complaint. And if you're in jail, if you're in custody, you have to essentially ask your abuser for a piece of paper to write a complaint on and then give it to them to file. And so there are several instances where a lot of these complaints never see the light of day. And so there has to be a completely different process in order for individuals to feel that they're being heard. And I think the sooner that happens, the better.
the other thing I was going to bring up is Las Colinas has been paraded on the news, as we all know, and also to investors as being a campus, even having a volleyball court. But it's to my understanding that none of those classrooms are being utilized. And I'm sure that when you are sheriff, which should have been from the beginning, that is something that is going to be addressed, correct? And why have they not utilized them for GED and for classes and for computer training like they stated they would?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's lots of reforms that need to take place, and all the way from who are we allowing into the jail in the first place? Why are we booking in nonviolent misdemeanants in order to fill up another jail that the sheriff wants to open down in Otay? Why do we need to do that? It doesn't have to be.
Thank you, David. As always, it's always a joy to hear you speak. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Good hearing from you, Ilka.
All right, thank you. Actually, I just realized we're still running really good on time. So I thought I looked down at my clock and I misread it. So we actually do have questions. So I think Leonard had a question next, and then if we can get those hands back up, I think Becky or did you have a question also? You can raise your hand, or whoever it was. So Leonard, go ahead and raise your hand.
There's Superstar Sam. There's Superstar Tommy.
Yes, Dave. As far as cost is what I kind of gather what your presentation is about for the Sheriff's Department. How much cost difference is there on the hiring and the staff to of the new applicant sheriffs, and then is there additional costs for diversity training of such for these new officers, and are they mandated to take things trainings like that?
So that's a very good question about costs associated with new hires, and then how do you get them off of training, and then what type of training do you give them, and the training in that time period. I would argue if you give specific community-based training to understand policing, you actually reduce your liability costs going forward, because you're creating a workforce that understands the community they're going to be responsible to police in. You're going to create an environment in which the mentality of policing is not one of conqueror, but one of community safety person. And the same thing for those that work in custody settings, that you're going to create an environment of empathy and compassion, that you are not there to punish them. You are there to provide an environment for the court system to judge them. And so I think it's very, very important to do the training that you talked about, the de-escalation type training when it comes to use of force, the training when it comes to implicit bias, any type of biases associated with whether you work in a detention setting or whether you work in the field, and also an understanding for those that work in custody settings to truly understand that they must partner with our medical and mental health practitioners as a team, similar to what we do in the field, to deal with those with underlying mental health issues who are in custody, because those are the ones who are more prone to suicide ideations. And that, I think, type of collaborative training and understanding, which is not happening now, will help reduce costs going forward.
Great, thank you. Becky, you have your hand up next. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
There, I did it. Okay. I don't know. This may be an unanswerable question, but when you talked about only 23% of law enforcement or the sheriff's department head was getting vaccinated. What is the idea with that? To me, that's saying that they don't care about the public. And, if they're supposed to be so caring about the public, this is coming from a person that's been married to two different types of law enforcement people that, of course, would never do that, so I don't understand what their thought processes are.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you, Becky. I'm totally there with you. I'm fully vaccinated, even the booster, and it is comforting to know that at least 23% of them do care and do care about what's going on. And I think what's going on within law enforcement agencies, they do attract a more conservative type of individual into law enforcement. And it's where law enforcement recruits also here in San Diego County. It's not uncommon for law enforcement to be down at the military bases recruiting. And, I'm not saying all military folks are the conservative Republican type, and I don't want to necessarily get into party affiliation, but as a Democrat in law enforcement, I was the unicorn. So that was very, very unusual. But having said that, my expectation of law enforcement is you are public servants. I truly believe that they should have a choice in a lot of things. And that goes for the broader perspective in our communities, that we live in a free society. We enjoy a lot of freedoms, and that doesn't stop because you put on a badge. But when you do put on that badge, you've accepted additional responsibilities, additional expectations from the communities that you've sworn to protect. And that's to protect them from stuff that you may not even see, which includes COVID, which I remember working in the jail as a brand new deputy, having to get tested for all kinds of stuff because we were exposed to all kinds of people who carry all kinds of things. And I didn't want to take it home to my family, or I didn't want to bring it into a facility. And so, it is a very tough question, but for me, what's a very easy answer is mandates. And as a term and condition of employment, if you want to wear that badge, you will participate in this safety process, whether it's wearing a seatbelt or a bulletproof vest. It is a mandate. And if you want to be in this job, then that is part of the job description.
That's true. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
All right, Colleen Cusack, welcome. And what's your question?
It ties in with the last comment. I know if we didn't recruit officers at the 18 to 25 year age range, we wouldn't have a lot of officers on the staff, but yet until they're 25, their brains haven't fully formed. And so what is your belief about the education that officers should have on the force, and what would you do to advance that?
Yeah, you mentioned age a little bit. We just had California agencies used to be able to hire at 19. Legislation just passed this year, at least made it 21. I think that's a good start. As far as ongoing education, I'm not necessarily a believer in it has to be a formal 4-year education in a state institution or anything, or college or something like that. But I do believe that there has to be an equivalent to the profession that they want to get in. And there has to be ongoing education equivalent to a 4-year degree or an 8-year degree, graduate work or undergraduate work. But it should be specific to the nature of law enforcement and the changing expectations of the community. And that it should be at the public's expense, because I think, again, going forward, the liabilities associated with a well-rounded, well-educated, knowledgeable police force benefits in the long run community safety and cuts down on a lot of the liabilities we see associated with excessive force, racial profiling, deaths in the jails. And so that need for ongoing education, I think, is extremely critical. But let's make it specific to law enforcement and not necessarily a degree in underwater basket weaving. Not that that's bad.
Okay, great. Becky?
Do they still put out the PORAC? I know I used to, when I was married to my first husband, he got the PORAC notification every month or so.
Yes, the PORAC
Okay.
magazine, it's still published every month.
And there was a certain thing that they were supposed to put into a notebook to keep and read and keep that had information in there on the state level.
Yeah, they often report on state legislation, support or not support.
Right.
And it's there are a lot of positions they take that I don't agree with.
Right.
Yeah.
But at least it was information about what
Yeah.
was going on. And so they were supposed to keep track of that and read that and keep up on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. All right. All right. So we've asked a whole bunch of questions of you, Dave, and it just seems like we have, there, and Anita has a new question. Good. Anita.
What is the makeup of the sheriff personnel? Are they like 98% white people, white males, or is there any diversity in race and gender?
Yeah, no,
I'm
very,
just
very
curious.
good question. So, if you look at the demographics of the county of San Diego, the sheriff's department is completely different. Right now, it's about 60% white male out of a department of 4,600 people. Not very many women. And the only reason I think they do have women represented on the department is they run a jail that has to be staffed, 90% staffed by women. We just finished Hispanic Heritage Month, and the Sheriff's Command Staff has 0 Latino representation in the command staff. We are in Filipino Heritage Month now, and there are 0 AAPI representation in the Sheriff's Office. We just had a change of top leadership in the Sheriff's Department, and the new undersheriff who just took over not too long ago. The first 4 top level command positions, and that those don't happen very often, were 4 white males. And so I don't think it's representative of our communities, and I think that hurts our law enforcement agency in their trust that they need to build in the communities. It's also interesting, there was an article that was actually written today that was published in La Prensa magazine, and it addressed the membership's view of diversity as a priority in the sheriff's office. And probably less than 1% of the respondents thought that it was a priority. A majority of them actually said in a survey that diversity in the department is not a priority. Wow is right. Yes.
Wow.
I'll try and find that article and put it in the chat for you.
That's incredible. So you've had, we've had a whole bunch of questions here. And so are there any other thoughts that you think that we might have missed that you'd like to address?
It's I can't emphasize enough the importance of elections and the importance of put that article in the chat. The importance of, even though you may not live in the city or in jurisdictions, which if you call for help, the sheriff shows up. If you live in a city like San Diego or National City or Chula Vista or Escondido, the sheriff has a direct impact on your quality of life and how crimes are investigated. Because remember, the sheriff also runs a regional crime lab. All sexual assault kits that are collected in the county of San Diego from any police agency sent to the sheriff's crime lab. And we've seen story after story after story where all those sexual assault kits are not tested. Not tested. We also see incidents where the sheriff responds to and has direct impact on aerial. I think helicopters are extremely important in providing quality service, from fire suppression helicopters to patrol helicopters. Now, who prioritizes these resources is the sheriff, the chief law enforcement officer in the county of San Diego. And how we expect our law enforcement to respond on a regional level, in great part, is managed by the sheriff in a county of San Diego. So it's extremely important who that sheriff is going forward.
Becky has another question.
How active is the people that volunteer? I can't.
The senior volunteers?
No, the reserves.
Oh, the reserves. Yeah. So the sheriff has a pretty large reserve contingent, and the sheriff has the only reserve contingent that's called search and rescue.
Right.
They're the quality people, dedicated individuals. They're all volunteers, all professionals, and their specialty is to go out and look for lost people. And I have tremendous respect for those individuals. They also have a reserve cadre of what's called law enforcement deputies, which can go out and work in patrol uniforms, and they look like regular deputies, and they drive regular cars. And there's not very many of those right now. And then they also have what's called the Senior Volunteer Patrol, who are volunteers, and they do what's called the YANA program, You Are Not Alone program, where they check on individuals who cannot get out and about. And they also do vacation checks, and they are a great group of individuals, and they also can write citations for vehicles illegally parked in handicap zones. So they're a great resource also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they still do have that.
Yes.
Okay, my second husband was part of that, so I didn't know if that was still up, but he was in charge of training for that.
Great. Those are great people.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me here. This is an extremely important topic. It's very timely. If nothing else, 2020 awakened a lot of folks to the idea of criminal justice reform and the need for it. And I think we are at ground zero here in San Diego County, and we could take our county back and our law enforcement.
Right. I just, it's like one of the things I keep coming back to is 4 years ago, I talked to Matt Strabone, who ran for county assessor. And he just made me just so clearly aware of the importance of 3 unknown public servants who affect our taxes to the highest degree, because their competency affects how our taxes are spent, and if and we will get increases in taxes and no tax savings if they're running competently, and that's the DA's office, the county assessor's office, and the sheriff's department.
Right.
And the San Diego City police department, I don't know if the other police departments also kick into it, but they all kick into like a pool, if I understand it right, for these resolving lawsuits against the department. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. There are agencies that pool resources, and we're kind of seeing the same thing happening within the city of San Diego. And that's money that can go to parks and libraries. That's money that you go to after school programs and shelter beds, and not putting people in jail.
Yeah. And I think I recall the difference between housing a homeless person in a motel room and getting them help is about like $250 a day versus $1,200 a day.
So just as an example, in this county, and the sheriff allows it to happen, non-violent misdemeanors, which a lot of them are the homeless and charges arrested for being homeless, like sleeping on the curb or something like that. And it costs the sheriff about $100,000 a year to house a person in custody. And if a person has underlying mental health or drug treatment issues, the sheriff can actually spend that budgeted money at the rate of $20,000 to $25,000 a year for treatment beds in the community, which could actually treat folks and get them to being taxpayers in the community and save millions of dollars every year. And so, but the industry, and I'm going to rant here a little bit, the industry is not built that the way. I mean, the county of San Diego and the sheriff's department have a brand new jail down in Otay that's empty that they need to fill. And it's no coincidence. A few weeks ago, the sheriff sent a letter to all the police agencies now saying that he's going to start accepting non-violent misdemeanors booked into the jail again. The only purpose to do that, the only purpose is to fill that empty jail, which does not make sense to me.
Wow. All right, last question, Ilka, because we're going to switch over to the next portion in 5 minutes. So Ilka, last question.
Yeah, I think what we were just talking about was something that I think is very vital and something that needs a lot of focus, because I have witnessed, the criminalization of our homeless. And I am not a medical care provider, so I cannot evaluate them and say, and claim, that I know if they have a mental health challenge, but I will make a reference. It just upsets me that they get these, that they have so many citations and then they get arrested, where some of these people, their capacity, when you engage with them, shows that they could die in jail if they behave that way towards other people. And I bring reference because there's a gentleman in Santee. He's an older gentleman, I would say in his 70s. He has a Russian accent, and I've had some amazing conversations with him, but I have seen the police hassle him and him be so confused by the piece of paper and not understand what it is. And, and I've had some discussions with him. So how can we stop this? And how do you intend, from your perspective, to create more of an initiative for outreach and putting PERT back into our program, but legitimate PERT that can not be put in danger, and also at the same time have some police training and be able to take care of.
Okay, Ilka, I'm going to caution you because we're crossing over the line, and he's only here to talk as an expert of what's happening, not on what he's going to do.
Oh no, I just
that's a different
okay.
meeting. So we can't cross that line because there are people who are.
As an expert, what would your solution be to help our homeless, instead of criminalize them?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, I think law enforcement has a role, but should not be the first responders to dealing with individuals who are unhoused, period. And jail is simply not the answer. And right now, what, in my personal opinion, my professional opinion, based on 3 decades of law enforcement, is that the solution that elected officials have pushed on law enforcement is displacement and using the jail system to move individuals around. And it's simply not working. I mean, the recidivism rate amongst individuals who are incarcerated is upwards of 85%. So that's an incredible amount of time that individuals are spending in a custody setting when it is not solving anything. And it's costing the taxpayers more and more money to house people in jail than it would be to house them in hotel rooms, to house them in, I understand the city of Chula Vista wants to create a mini village. And so I think that is what communities need to look at. And what we need is a sheriff who controls the jails to really create a booking criteria and work with communities that we are not going to use jails as displacement tool for outside agencies to deal with their unsheltered population.
Fantastic, yay.
Yay.
All right, so let's all take a moment to give our thanks to Dave Myers for his wisdom and his insight into a chronic problem. Thank you, Mr. Myers. You honor us with sharing what you know, and we are going to hopefully take this and become more active within our local areas and try and do something more to help.
Please stay informed. Please stay informed. It's too important not to. Thanks, everybody.
All
Hi,
right.
Wayne.
All right, so we're moving into the next part, and the next part is, I'm going to share a screen here real quick. Kenner, what we learned from the recall, and we have Commissioner Tommy Howe, GoTV team leader Wayne Durnitz, and myself to share with everybody what did we learn from or relearn from the recall election. And I'm going to let Tommy lead this because I love to let Tommy lead because yeah, he was one of my favorite DJs back in the day.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was on the air at 91X most recently. It's been a few years now, but a lot of people know me from when I was on the air at FM 94.9, which was for about 10 years. And very briefly, I was at KPRI. So if you were listening very closely, you might have heard me play a bread song around that time. But at any rate, no, I appreciate it, David, and it's good to be here. And, you know, the signs were out there very, very early that the recall was going to be a very, very serious effort. And in its own weird way, it hasn't gone away. There is a hangover among the side that lost. And I can tell you about some of the experiences I've had and interactions I've had with neighbors and voters, without naming names, on the backside of the recall election that have been slightly disturbing. But I think a lot of this comes from the fact that we have a couple of generations of Americans at this point who never really had an opportunity to take civics classes the way some of us might have. And not that a couple of days worth of civics classes are going to guarantee you being a capable contributor to a democratic society and sustaining our republic. But a lot of what has happened over the last couple of decades is a lot of those subjects have been merged into social studies. And so myself, I went to a very, very good public school in Western Pennsylvania where I grew up. And so we had civics courses. And so a lot of my fellow students and I, we had a general understanding of how the world worked and how government worked just coming out of high school. And we in these spaces with these kinds of organizations, we take a lot of that knowledge for granted. We understand what it takes to go and pass a law. We understand the role the particular elected officials may have, whether it's the sheriff or whether it may be the governor. And we understand where the boundaries are between where those power boundaries lie. Well, not everyone understands that. And so when you don't understand how government works, and you're really getting a terrible impression of what government is from institutions that are clearly seeking to subvert that, like Fox News, like OAN, like a lot of very destructive right-wing media, you start to think that the system is weighed against you without really understanding how you fit into that system and how you can make change in that system. And so we really have several generations now, I would say, in the United States that really suffer from that. And as a result, you wind up having a lot of individuals who become rather engaged in things like this recall election. There was no reason to mount a recall effort against Governor Newsom. Whether you like Governor Newsom or not, he wasn't behaving in any criminal behavior. There was no evidence of any kind of criminal behavior whatsoever. There was literally no reason for running a recall other than some Republicans were unhappy with the election results from 2018. And what was so absurd about the recall was that I'm a candidate. I'm running for a San Diego City Council seat. I have a primary coming up in June. Well, guess what? So does Governor Newsom. So, anyone who is unhappy and unsatisfied with the direction that the state's been going in would have an opportunity to weigh in that primary at a level that they might be interested in. But obviously, they would at least have a vote at the very least. So there was so much nonsense behind the primary. And I don't mean to take up all the bandwidth here, David, but I would just say that when my team and I started canvassing in the summertime, mid-July to mid-August, the warning signs were really there. For a while there, I really thought Newsom was going to lose, because you go to Republican households and they had a plan. They knew when the ballots were going to arrive, and that was D-Day. And they knew who they were voting for, and they were ready to vote. And you'd go to Democratic households, and especially a lot of older Democratic households, a lot of these voters didn't really understand the whole idea of having a ballot mailed to them. And so their reaction was, well, I want nothing to do with this. This is nonsense. This is ridiculous and stupid. It's a waste of time. And I would say, well, I think we agree with that. But if you ignore the ballot and you leave it on the kitchen table, it does no one any good there. And we're going to wind up with a terrible governor. And now it turned out, thankfully, the state Democratic Party was able to turn that around. Labor joined together with the Democratic Party and really made an enormous difference. And most importantly, got that message out to Democrats to don't worry about the second part. Just fill out the first part, say no, mail it in, and that's it. You're done. And ultimately, that was the right message. And clearly, Newsom won by margins that were as large as his victory over John Cox in 2018. So that's, and like I said, I've had some unusual run-ins since then, but I can save that for later, David, if you want to move on to Wayne's remarks.
Wayne, let's go ahead and let you open up. Let's talk about GoTV. I know this wasn't a GoTV, the recall wasn't a GoTV event, but GoTV still was there. And I was, I'm a precinct walker for my precinct, and I work with my GoTV team here at El Cerrito. But let it, talk to us a little bit about GoTV and how you mobilize and how it's going to be essential that we do the same type of outreach and press the flesh and talk to our neighbors. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Wayne, go ahead and unmute yourself.
It's getting late for me.
That's okay.
Thank you very much, David, and I'd be happy to cover the Go team, but I did want to respond to the question about the recall, which is an intriguing question and one that I've looked into and attended some seminars on since the election results were known. I have if I may, how much time do I have?
Take 5-10 minutes.
Okay. I have 3 takeaways from what I learned during and after the election. one lesson is this was an example where polling really made a difference in the outcome of the election, in the sense that the polls that came out in late July by the Institute for Governmental Studies and the Public Policy Institute of California, both were consistent. They were very legitimate polls with very large samples and low error margins. And what they showed was that Democrats were not mobilized. And they were either apathetic or they were angry at the governor for his French laundry faux pas, or some other reason they didn't think they would vote. But when that news came out and it became real to the vast majority of Democrats up and down the state because of the newspaper publicity, all of a sudden the polls started moving in favor of Newsom. And that happened in the essentially 4 weeks, 5 weeks between the polls coming out and the ballots hitting and the ballots starting to come back. It was a very rapid turnaround there. So I just want to say that we make a lot of criticism of polling when they don't seem to get it right. But in this instance, the advanced polling was a great help to get the voters informed and to turn out. The second point is Democrats are not complacent. They did turn out. When it became obvious that Newsom was possibly going to lose this and be replaced by a Trump-like Republican radio announcer, they didn't want to see that happen. And as you pointed out, as Tommy pointed out, the results of the recall election were almost identical to the results of Gavin Newsom's victory in the 2022 2018 November election. So I feel very good about both of those things. And also the third point is that although a great majority of voters favor retaining the recall, they don't want to give it up. An even larger proportion of voters would like to see reforms made so that it doesn't have the characteristics that this had. I think this recall was driven not by so much by the Republican Party as it was driven by special interest PACs funded by very wealthy people who don't like the California's regulation of businesses and the oil industry and the Koch brothers and those kind of PACs. They poured a lot of money into California to finance the signature gathering. And they overachieved, in fact, because they came up with far more signatures than they needed. But still, California's recall provision called for a petition of only 15% of the voters who voted in the last gubernatorial election. And some states now are as high as 20%. Kansas, I think, is 40%, which is a huge barrier. So I think we're going to see some reform made to the recall process. It's going to take a constitutional amendment, but the state legislature is well aware of it. And I think this recall frightened them. And I think we're going to see some major reforms. And I think they will be helpful for us going forward.
Wow, thank you.
So let me then turn to the Go team. So David, you asked me to address some specific questions like, what is the Go team? Well, let me say the Go team is all volunteer organization whose mission is to get out the vote for state and local Democratic candidates during each of the election cycles, the primaries and the general elections. It's a program of the San Diego County Democratic Party, operating under the rules and policies established by the Go Team Executive Board. And it's organized, we have about 66 Go teams in San Diego County. Each community in which there's a Go team operating has a community coordinator who oversees and assists the neighborhood leaders. Neighborhood leaders are the heart and soul of the GO team. They're the ones who do the canvassing and are the primary point of contact with registered voters. Each region, there are 6 regions in San Diego County. Each region has a regional coordinator who oversees and assists the community coordinators. There's also a countywide director of GO teams who oversees the regions, sits on the GO team executive board, and is also an ex officio member of the county party central committee. The mission of the GO teams include contacting selected registered voters, specifically registered Democratic voters and NPP voters, or declined to state voters, in person, telephone contact, texting, and telephoning, asking voters about the issues that most concern to them. This is one of the 2 most important things that GO team volunteers do, asking voters what are the issues you're most concerned about, and recording those answers and sending them back up the line. They also inform voters about the Democratic candidates for all of the races in the particular area. And they provide the party, the state, the California Democratic Party and the county Democratic Party's slate of recommended candidates for all of the open positions. And they advocate for selected party slate candidates, those that are considered the most important. And they also provide information about ballot measures and the party's recommendations on whether to approve or not on ballot measures. These are provided in the form of a door hanger. I'm sure everybody has seen one of those. It's very important. The people we contact are looking forward to getting those door hangers because it guides them in how they're going to vote. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote on every case, but in many cases, it helps fill in the blanks for them. They also provide voter registration assistance, providing forms and help in getting eligible voters registered. They provide information on where or how to return the ballots that come in the mail. And they also ask voters if they have or if they have voted or will vote for the selected candidates and measures the party is looking to focus on. And finally, they enter all this information they gather into the party's voter database. And of course, the important part of the voter contact is to remind voters there is an election, when you have to get your ballot back in, and ask them if they will make a commitment to vote. How do you join the GO team? Anybody can join the GO team, provided you are a registered Democrat or registered non-party preference voter. The work is not difficult, and most volunteers enjoy doing it. GO team volunteers tend to stay with the program for years and years. It's no more difficult than taking a walk around your neighborhood and chatting with your friends and neighbors about things of common interest. We only engage with registered Democrats and NPP voters with whom we share common values and priorities. We don't knock on doors of registered Republicans, although incidentally, we do come across some households where there are mixed party couples or families living. We don't argue with anyone or try to change anyone's political preferences. We try to educate, inform, and ask voters about their concerns. We help voters vote by providing voter registration information, explanation of ballot choices, both candidates and issues, and with any problems in returning their completed ballots. To be eligible to become a GO team volunteer, as I mentioned, you must be a registered Democrat or NPP voter. All volunteers must complete a 90-minute orientation program to learn about the GO team rules, practices, and guidelines, and sign a short affidavit upon completion of the orientation to follow party guidelines and to not use the proprietary information that's provided to the volunteers for any other purposes. To sign up to join the GO team, go to the County Democratic Party website, sddemocrats.org, open the Get Involved tab, click on the Sign Up to Volunteer button, fill in the form and you'll be contacted by either a community coordinator or county party staff to help you complete your application. The best volunteers, what does it take to be a volunteer, a good volunteer? Essentially, volunteers are people like us who are committed to making our democracy work through voter participation, who like to help others, who enjoy meeting new friends and neighbors, and who believe that the Democratic Party values, policies are best for our county and state and nation. So that's it about Go Teams. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Durnitz?
I covered everything, it looks like.
Yeah, you did really good. I will comment that the first time I walked my neighborhood, just to kind of get a feel for everybody, I did it without having a list of who's who. In a couple of households, I knocked on doors where there were Republicans, and violence was threatened upon me in those two households. So I really, really, really appreciate having that the information of where the safe houses are, and then also knowing that if you have a house that has Republicans and Democrats, that it just kind of changes your approach so that you're more cautious and more aware of your security. So the party has trained you very, very well. I've done training 3 times with GoTV. The first time they kind of call it the Knock on Doors program, and I went down to Golden Hill to a civic center down in Golden Hill, and I had a wonderful training by a guy who was getting ready to go jump off and join Bernie in 2016, and since then I've done a couple more trainings and gotten a little bit better at it. And it's really important that you keep your they make changes to the system all the time and make improvements. So it's good to come back and improve your education with that. So I really appreciated my team leader here in my neighborhood over here at El Cerrito in Rolando. So they're good people.
And as you say, the training that we provide to new volunteers and a refresher every now and then provides techniques and methods on how to knock on doors, how to formulate your script or your message to ask the questions, and what to do if you get into a difficult situation.
David, if I could, I wouldn't mind relaying sort of an anecdote that I recently had.
Jump in, it's your turn.
Doing some canvassing for my campaign that was related to the recall, because they've been overlapping. And one of the nice things about my current campaign is that I speak to everybody. I talk to Democrats, I talk to declined states, Republicans, peace and freedom, libertarians, Green Party. We've got the whole gamut. But I'm also I don't know, I'm probably a little nuts when I'm canvassing. I really enjoy it. I enjoy talking with my neighbors. And so if you're not on my list, but you're out washing the car or you're in the driveway, I'm gonna say hi, and you're gonna get a pitch. And how detailed that pitch may be will be what your reaction is like. And so I was canvassing one particular cul-de-sac, and this goes back to what I said about civics classes and maybe a lack of a basic understanding of how our government works in relation to our citizens. So I started talking to a guy who was talking to a neighbor who was on the turf that had been cut for me. So I knew that this guy that I'd spoken with, this person was a voter. Started talking with this guy, and seemed normal, and we got off on the right foot. But he started asking me, some strange questions about, well, why is it that if my council member doesn't vote the way I want them to, how do they take that vote from me? So you had no understanding of how this works. And of course, I would say, well, if you don't like how someone is voting, if you don't like how an elected official is voting, then you can work with your neighbors to potentially find another person and maybe vote that current person out. And that was really lost on him. No one had ever expressed that to him before. So he's asking me about, well, take the whole thing with Newsom. So you know where this is going to go. Why is it that my neighbors and we all voted against Newsom and he still won? He really did not understand that it's an entire state, the largest state in the United States, voted on that, including some of the biggest cities in the United States, including our city. And it truly mystified him that he was somehow not encountering anyone who had voted to preserve Newsom as governor. And he was angry about it. He really did not understand that. And I said, well, look, I mean, if you come to, we're all in Mira Mesa, if you come to my neighborhood and you speak with my neighbors, I can tell you that they all voted to keep Newsom. They're very happy with the job he's doing, give or take certain concerns they may have about this or that. But they certainly wanted to retain him. And what his answer was, I'm not kidding, his answer was, well, you can't trust them. So, yeah, there's no winning with that. But at the same time, you're dealing with individuals who really have no functional understanding of how democracy works. And so when it's presented to them that, there's a recall, we're going to get them this time, and it's hyped up and ginned up the way it has been on right-wing media. I do a presentation on this, by the way, but if it's been hyped up in the way it has, they don't understand that, no, I'm sorry, I realize you voted for the recall, but guess what? Almost the entirety of LA County does not agree with you on that, and therefore you lose. And there was really a lost concept on them that, I can see Russia from my house. Why aren't they seeing the same things that I am? So, and I would imagine, Wayne, I mean, a lot of, I've gone on Go Team canvases before, and it is helpful because you have the turf carved for the most amenable voters, the most frequent Democratic and decline to state voters. And that's obviously the best turf for that. But it is interesting when you go and you talk with your neighbors, because you do find out a lot about what's going on. But my point was that there is going to be a hangover from this. And even though it's a hangover among, less than 50% of the population of the state, we as Democrats ignore that at our peril, because someday it will be a lot closer than whatever that blowout number was that Newsom got. Even he won here in San Diego County by 60-40, which is pretty good, considering this was once the bastion of Reagan conservatism in Southern California and the US. So I always suggest getting out and talking to your voters is not only the best way to get your candidate elected, but it's also the best way to potentially begin the process of curbing some ignorance and making everyone feel as though they're a part of a giant democracy instead of in all these very tribalized camps.
Yeah, those are good points, Tommy, if I may. I have been regretting the fact that for the last 30 or 40 years, our educational system has dropped the idea of a civics education in which high school students are taught how our federal and system of government works with the provisions of the federal government, provisions of the various state governments and the relationships. We have an appalling lack of understanding of our government system in this nation. And that's why part of our Go Team job is education. We can't go into too many details, of course, but we do what we can to answer questions that the voters have. And specifically, when we say we want to get out the vote, we mean we want to get out the Democratic Party vote and capture as many NPP voters as possible. That's all we're worried about. We're concerned about. We don't trouble Republican voters. They're entitled to their opinion, but we hope we have more voters than they have.
All right, I'm going to take a quick moment here. I'm going to illustrate exactly one of the concepts Tommy was talking about. And my neighborhood, we haven't had road repair in 30 years. Our streets are like in miserable shape. So about 7 months ago, when the recall was right in midstream, these signs went up and said, Gloria, pave our streets. And so we're going, oh, that's a pretty interesting thing. And then finally, we got a little interaction, and our council member, who's Sean Elo Rivera, we found out, he said, well, I have discretionary funds to fix 10 streets in my district per the mayor, Todd Gloria, but I can't fix your streets because your streets are going to be ripped up and torn up because they're going to be doing sewer and water lines. And we said, oh, okay, when? And then he said, yeah, 2027. So we have to put up with 6 more years of really horrible streets where people who ride their bicycles are crashing because of potholes and cracks in the street where your thin bicycle tires get pulled into it, and then all of a sudden your handlebars get twisted out of your hand. And so I've talked to Sean Elo Rivera about this, and via chat or a text, and I said, it's this is the sign that's up. No repair until 2027. We're going to vote you out because you're not doing your job. It'll mean that we'll have gone almost 40 years without having our streets repaved. And we're aware that there's a law that said every 20 years your streets are supposed to be repaved. And they don't repair our streets. They just throw slurry on it, and that's their whole repaving method, is they just throw slurry on it, and after 2 rainstorms, it runs off into the sewer system and runs out to sea.
Streets and potholes are, having worked in local government for 40 years, I can tell you from firsthand experience, streets and potholes are among the most contentious issue voters have. And the buck stops at the city council. However, that's not where the money comes from. Traditionally, local streets and county roadways have been financed, the maintenance of them have been financed out of the state gas tax fund. That's the 13 cents or so per gallon, 14, whatever it is now, cents per gallon that everybody who buys gasoline pays. The problem is that with more hybrid and electric and high mileage vehicles, people are buying less and less gasoline. That's great for the environment, but it's not good for the road fund or the streets repaving project. So Joe Biden's Build Back Better program provides a lot of money throughout the country to states and to local governments for making street repairs and improvements. If he can get that program, the Build Back Better bills passed this coming week. We'll have to wait and see. But it is an ongoing problem. There's talk now at Sandag. I just learned this an hour ago. Sandag is looking at a per mileage tax on vehicles on certain highways that would require users of the highways, regardless of what type of vehicle they're driving, to pay 4 cents a mile for driving on those particular highways. That's going to be very controversial, but we need to do something to replace the diminishing gas tax funds that we traditionally have relied on.
Yeah, I get you. I just, like I say, I think it's real interesting that here we have a small group of activists, who are operating, for the community, the small community interest, and their solution, and they're looking at going, okay, well, we're going after Sean Elo, but he's not the person who created this problem. He's just the recipient of their ire.
Yeah.
So
another concern is, I'm sorry, David, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I just go like, it's a difficult, and it has a lot of facets. This is an emerald cut diamond, and it's gonna, it's got a lot of hard edges, and it can cut glass. So all that being said, I'll yield to Mr. Howe.
Well, and I would, I mean, this doesn't really relate to the recall, but, as Wayne indicated, I mean, streets and potholes are really voters' most frequent interaction with a lot of, with the city in a lot of ways. And you become used to the roads that you drive upon, and if there's a pothole and you run your car through it, you sort of know who you're angry at. But of course, here in the city of San Diego, to be very specific and to be fair, to Council Member Elo Rivera, I mean, the city now has a strong mayor form of government. We've had it for 15 odd years now. So, council members don't necessarily have, look, I ran against Chris Cate. I gave him an exceptionally hard time in a general election campaign about this very, very issue. I'm running on this very, very issue. And I've got grave concerns about my community in relation to other communities. That having been said, the strong mayor form of government has taken some of that power out of the hands of council members, and really a lot of that direct access to a lot of city departments. I mean, you can talk to somebody in the elevator on the way up to whatever floor you're going to. But ultimately, as Wayne indicated, as David indicated in his relaying his conversation with Councilmember Elo Rivera, he said, well, I've got X amount of money from the mayor to pursue X amount of street repairs. But, Sean doesn't necessarily have access to that department himself. When you're a council member, you're not necessarily a viceroy of a district, but at the same time, I think that you should have greater access to a lot of these departments. And so you can actually be a little more precise and a little more surgical with the funds that you have, and we are all very familiar with this, because, there's rebuilding roads, and then there's putting the seal on the roads, as David was talking about, frequently on the roads that have just been done a few years ago. Why is that? It is because, well, we don't have to worry about the water line on there, or we know SDG&E is going to come dig a trench in 6 months. That kind of organization has to get ironed out too, but you cannot have residents driving over those roads for years, for decades at a time. And I don't want to go into my stump speech. I'm trying to avoid that. But, I got roads up here that haven't been breathed on in 50 years. And that is not right. I don't care what kind of trench you're thinking you're going to dig in the next couple of years. That's totally inappropriate for the 8th biggest city in the United States.
There we go.
Yeah.
With that, I think I think it is a good stopping point, unless anybody has any final thoughts they want to throw out, because we're beating a poor dead horse, and the Democratic Party has just passed the plank in a resolution about being nice to race horses. So let's be nice to horses, and let's not beat any more dead horses. So let's I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate everybody's participation. I've seen quite a few new faces. I've seen some familiar faces, and really, we really want to encourage everybody here that to think about it. And if you'd like to volunteer for a position within this chapter, and to help me build this chapter up, I would appreciate your help. And you can again, there's that. Our email address is sandiego@pda-ca.com. So you can reach out to me if you'd like to volunteer for to work with me locally, or if you'd like to work with the state and work on state issues, and deal with trying to coordinate more things. And we are a PAC also, so we're going to be trying to do more package things down the line as we progress. And lastly, the most importantly, is we are a volunteer organization. We rely on the kindness of strangers. So please be a stranger who donates and helps us pay for our Zoom costs and so forth. And there's a, on your invitation, you'll see that there is a link on your invitation so you can make a donation to PDA-CA. Mike, or anybody else want to pitch in?
Yeah, I just have a couple things to say. One of them is a reminder that on November 14th, we will have a statewide meeting on California Medicare for All. We've got some incredible speakers coming up to speak on that one. And I didn't mention it before, but one of our next statewide meetings where we invite 20,000 people, including everyone in San Diego. The topic is planned to be how to keep the recall from happening again. There's all sorts of options, and not all of them require constitutional amendments. That's what we're going to discuss, and we're going to have some experts telling us how we can get involved and maybe get something done. You know, California is only one of, and I forget the number, I think it's somewhere around 20 states that even allow recalls. In every other state, you can impeach. And California is also one of the few states that does, if the governor leaves office from a recall or impeachment, that it doesn't necessarily go to the lieutenant governor. You know, if it just went to the lieutenant governor, I don't think the last recall would have occurred. And I don't think, but I'm not 100% sure that's not in the Constitution. So we have some interesting things coming up, and some of them are San Diego events, and some of them are statewide events. But in any case, we're going to do our best to get the most interesting experts and tell you how to get involved. So that's my little pitch.
All right, and then I guess for the last little bit, let's 1 minute candidate statements. You have any candidates who want to speak? Tommy's shaking his head.
I'm more than happy to give 60 seconds, David. I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Well, it was very nice seeing everyone tonight. San Diego County Planning Commissioner Tommy Howe. I am running for San Diego City Council in District 6. Obviously, there's a redistricting process that's going on right now. In fact, there's a meeting that's occurring right now. But you know, we have a general idea as to where the boundaries are largely going to be landing. We're very excited about moving forward with where the new boundaries wind up being finalized. As a Mira Mesa resident, we're very confident that Mira Mesa is going to remain one of the nucleuses of District 6. But, you know, kind of regarding my last comments, I mean, infrastructure has been an enormous concern that we've been speaking about with our neighbors again and again. Spoke about this when I was the endorsed Democratic candidate for the seat back in 2018. We're speaking about it now. But not only that, it's also a matter of managed growth. And Wayne talked a little bit about this, about the Sandag speaker tonight at the Torrey Pines Democratic Club. We have a number of units going online in District 6 over the next several years. 7,000 in Mira Mesa, upwards of 5,000 in Kearney Mesa. And just as we bring densification into our communities, we need to make sure that we're also doing so in a way that we're softening some of the hard suburban edges, taking the speed off of some of these areas, and basically retrofitting a lot of these suburban spaces so that they are more amenable. So our new neighbors, we can not only welcome to the neighborhood, but also encourage them to get outside and walk and ride their bicycle. Again, Tommy Howe running for San Diego City Council District 6, TommyHowe.com, neighborhoods first. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. Mike, you had your hand up?
No, that was actually my applause thing. So,
Oh, that was your clapping hands. Okay.
yeah.
Well, with that, again, I really, truly appreciate everybody being here. This is a safe space where we can be progressive together, progressive and activisty. So let's be progressive and activisty, and let's get some good mischief done. So that being said, I bid you all adieu and bonne nuit. Good night.